Good day everybody, in this tutorial I'll be teaching you on how to color a skin tone as easy as possible. Personally, coloring a skin tone is probably the most complicated thing to color, but I'll try to break it down into layers to make it easier to understand for everybody. So without any further ado, let's begin the tutorial. Let's start by understanding how light behaves. This will be a quick learning recap on lighting behaviors before we can proceed to coloring the skin tone. I'll be using the sphere since it's a great primitive shape for visualization. For now, let's try not to think about the process on how to do it. We'll get there later on. Let's start with the main color first. This one will be the skin tone color without the shadow and light. Then later on, we're gonna add the shadow. It's supposed to be black, but since there will be a lot of lights around it, the shadow turns out to be lighter. Then the opposite side of the shadow will be the highlighted area of the skin. You can just use hard light for the highlighted area and multiply for the shadow. As you can see, the object is still too flat since it doesn't have enough detail yet. Now what is happening inside the shadow? This will become interesting when we start adding the bounce light and dark corners. The dark corner called ambient occlusion, but if you're a beginner, just call it dark corner so that it will be easier for you to remember. As a person who didn't grow up with English as a first language, hearing ambient occlusion makes me lost before. Now the other one will be the ambient light, or easier if we call it bounce light, reflected light, or indirect light. A light that caused by the surroundings such as sky, light bounces to the ground or walls, anything that's not came directly from the main light. Now the highlighted area isn't also flat, there are also things going on within it, but a little different. They call this center light, but for me, I'm just gonna call it edge light because it's easier for me to remember. Where the area absorbs the most light. It appears on the edge of the rounded object because of our perspective to the subject. It's a collective light that we tend to see because of its diagonal angle to our perspective. It's so subtle, but it's there. It's a little touch to make the object more rounded. Now, specular lighting is something I learned when I was learning 3D. Basically, it's a reflection to an actual light source, but only be visible if the object is shiny. I still keep it in mind or try to imagine everything as shiny so that I know where to add the most bright area of the object. The shinier the object, the sharper the reflection is. If the object isn't shiny, like the skin tone, it would turn out to be blur. Now this should look like finish, but not for a skin tone. It won't look alive without the subsurface scattering. It is a light that scatters underneath the surface of the skin or an object. Since the color underneath our skin is red, it appears to be reddish or orange to the surface as we see it. This appears between the shadow and light, but mostly within the shadow area because this isn't bright enough to be seen in a bright surface. We will be able to see the color underneath our skin because our skin is a little translucent. The good thing about this method is you can use this on different skin tone and it would still look fine, but with a little bit of adjustment to it by tweaking the hue, saturation, and luminosity. Using a sphere would make it look simple. Now let us see how would we apply this to a human subject. Now the first thing you gotta do is apply a flat color to your line art. Just separate the skin color and the cloth. Keep it 2 layers, because there will be something we're gonna do about it later. On skin tone, there should be reddish surfaces on areas where we have thin skins, such as cheek, nose, shoulder, knuckles, knees, and elbows, and also to some areas that is being squeezed or a tensioned area. Now let's start creating the shadow. First, make a new layer and fill the entire canvas with color black. To make it quick, just hold Alt key, then delete. Now let us make a selection based on every color by holding Ctrl, then Shift, then click all the thumbnail preview on colored layers. Now while the selection is active, click the button Create Layer Mask. This will crop the layer based on your selection. This is what we call masking. This allows you to paint only inside the cropped area. Just be sure you've selected the layer preview, not the masking thumbnail. Just be careful. Now then set the layer to multiply, but since it's too dark, instead of tweaking the opacity, I suggest you use the hue, saturation, and luminosity in tonal correction. To go there, drop down the edit, tonal correction, and then select hue, saturation, and luminosity. Then turn up the luminosity slider so the shadow would appear gray. Now let us prepare the tools that you'll be using. With your eyedropper tool, set the tool property settings to current layer so that you'll be only copying the colors within the selected layer. Then these two will be your best friend. Instead of using eraser, I swap the brush color to transparent. The shortcut for this is the C key on your keyboard. And all you gotta do is apply the shadow. My way is to start from dark and use the transparent brush to erase the area for the lights. Then I'm just gonna color pick the shadow area to pick the specific gray color for my shadow. This would act as switching the color of your brush. To color pick quickly, just hold Alt and click or tap the area you wish to color pick. Now this is a quick preview on how the process went. From here on, you'll be using this tool repetitively until the end, so keep those in mind. Now for adding the light, it's pretty simple. Make a new layer, change the blending mode to hard light, hold Alt, then drag and drop the masking thumbnail from the shadow layer to the light layer. This will copy the mask to the other layer. Fill out the canvas with the color of the light you desire. Control and click the thumbnail of the shadow layer to make a selection. Then delete the selected area, leaving the opposite side of the shadow as light. Then adjust the saturation, hue, and luminosity to make it right. Now apply the mask to the layer by clicking the icon beside the delete icon. To add a depth within the shadows, this is the time you apply the ambient occlusion, and this may take a while. In a new layer, you're gonna use a lasso tool to select the corner you want to darken. Repeat the process to all the corners of the illustration. Once we're done, hide the line art and we'll see the progress on how it goes. This is before ambient occlusion, and this is now with the ambient occlusion. Now it has depth and you can see the details even without the line art. It's optional to keep the line art, and the application of ambient occlusion will be minimal. As of now, this is not perfect. Let's wait to add the ambient light before we try to improve the shadow even more. Now let's continue adding more detail to the shadow by adding ambient light to it. I added the background to show where the ambient light should came from. In this scene, there are two sources of ambient light, the skylight and the wall. The skylight should hit the upper area of the shadow, while the wall bounces the light, hitting the back of the subject. Ambient light only appears under shadows, so place your new layer on top next to the shadow. Then change its blending mode to soft light, and create a mask based on the shadow silhouette. Repeat what we did before. Control and click the shadow layer, and create layer mask, then copy that mask to the other ambient light layer. Now let's begin adding the ambient light. What I usually do is paint a soft brush in general area and erase those aren't included. If the color isn't right, you can always use the hue, saturation, and luminosity to adjust. The goal is to make it subtle for the skylight, and adding shape to the subject using the bounce light. And now here's the before and after. This is the image without the ambient light. This is with the skylight. And finally, this is with the bounce light. You may also notice that there's a pink tint on her arm. That color came from her blouse. The color of the surface could also affect the color of the bounce light. And while working on the ambient light, I'm also trying to add some missing parts on dark corners. Now let's move on to additional lighting detail, the center light and specular. You can add new layer by following what we did with the ambient light. Create two new layer on top of the light. Control and click the thumbnail of the light layer. Then create a layer mask. Then now you can start doing the center light by using a soft brush on the edges of bright tones. Now if you check the before and after, you barely see it, but it's there, and it's important. Still important. Now we'll be adding the specular lighting. Specular lighting is one of the best that could elevate the beauty of your work. When adding it, I suggest to apply it using a rough brush Think about your subject being glossy. Then apply white paint on areas where you think the reflection of the main light would appear. Now the sharpness of the reflection depends on how glossy the material is. Specular in the skin and clothing should appear to be smooth, while the other areas, like eyes and hair, should appear to be shiny. Since the hair is glossy, the surrounding color of the shine should be darkened. There are two ways to fix it. You can extend the shadow layer on the area and repeat the process we've been through, or just use the ambient occlusion layer. As for me, I'm just gonna use the ambient occlusion layer to manually paint dark tone around it. Now it should look like this. Subsurface scattering is the final thing we gotta add, and it's crucial to a skin tone render. Since we're gonna add it on the edge of the shadow, the layer setup will be similar as the ambient lighting, but with a small modification. Just add a new layer with a blending mode of hard light and with the same masking as the ambient light, and it should be on top of those two layers. Since we're only gonna add the subsurface scattering under the skin tone, we should exclude the areas where the clothes are. That's the point of separating the layer of skin and the other colors. This is what you're gonna do. Hold Ctrl and click the other color layer to make a selection of that layer. Select the mask of the subsurface layer, then press delete. Now you'll have a mask on the skin surface only. Then the next thing you're gonna do is apply subsurface scattering on the edges of the light and shadow. It may take time if you do it manually, which is supposed to be fine. But what if your shadow was like this? This will be tedious to work on, but I found some way to do it efficiently and save half of the process. Now be sure that you're selecting the subsurface layer thumbnail, not the mask. Keep that in check. Now hold Ctrl, then select the shadow layer mask to make a selection. Be sure you have your round brush or hard brush with a red or orange color, but you can adjust it later on. Go to Edit, then Outline Selection, and then the outline selection window will pop out. Select Draw on Border with a line width of 10 or can be adjusted depending on what you need, then press Enter. It should now appear like this. If it's too thick, you can just undo it and repeat the process, but with thinner outline. If it's too orange or vibrant, you can just adjust the saturation of it by still going to Hue, Saturation, Luminosity. Then once you have the perfect outline, you can erase those unneeded areas. Then blur the edges and enhance the large area of shadow using a soft brush, especially on the arm. But of course, doing the original one was easier and faster. And now here's the final render. The final result can still be enhanced if you have more time. You can always finish it by overpainting the entire thing if you are comfortable enough. This study serves as your guide on lighting techniques, and learning this could enhance your rendering skills for semi-realistic. So that is for today's tutorial. I hope you learned something new here and some useful features the app can provide. Thank you for listening and see you soon to the next videos. And yeah, subscribe.